few different things that we've been seeing. So I'm based in Singapore, and an awful lot of the ways that people interact with media and the kinds of media that people are using are a little bit different to what you would see in Europe. There's a very, very strong domination of mobile, even more than we see in this part of the world. And that's partly due to the economics, but it's also just due to the fragmentation of the way that people live their lives in Asia. A big part of that, especially in social media, is things like chat apps. So obviously, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, already very big in this part of the world as well. Things like Snapchat, changing the way that people are using social media as well. So where we saw with Facebook, for example, there was that sort of one-to-many model where everything was quite public for a few years. It's moving back into a more private conversation now. So the conversations that you have on WhatsApp are very much more closed. Marketers can't tap into those in the same way that they do with a Twitter post, for example. So there's this sort of tendency towards privacy of social media, which may be a bit of an oxymoron, but at the same time it's still very social. It's just that we're not necessarily involving the whole world in those conversations. I suppose related to that is this continuous and perhaps ongoing fear that our privacy is being invaded by marketers and by ad platforms. This wonderful collection of big data, which for us as industry practitioners is very exciting, but for the average person on the street becomes quite scary. A lot of people are uncomfortable about the idea that people know too much about us. Personally, I take the opposite view. I want advertisers to know everything about me because I want to see stuff that's relevant to me, but that's not always shared by normal people. As you guys know, you're all involved in this day-to-day, the clutter aspect, especially in digital media, is becoming increasingly a problem, and that's one of the things that social brands attempts to get round. It's no longer about clutter. When you went out for the networking break there and you sort of saw a room full of people, you gravitated towards certain individuals that either looked as though they may share common interests with you, you may have looked for people that were of an advantage to your network, and that's what social brands are all about. It's not seeing a room full of people, it's identifying the ones that you think are going to have the greatest value to you. And then finally, the increasing ad spend. Now, I know for a lot of you the increase in ad spend is a good thing, but at the same time, the data that we were seeing this morning from Steve King, a lot of that is about inflation of cost as much as it is about an increase in actual allocation of budgets. As that gets more and more complicated, as the number of media we have to buy grows, it's going to become increasingly difficult for us to know where to allocate our money. But if we are a truly social brand, as we see with these publications, a lot of those problems go away, or they change in nature quite dramatically. But the fundamental reasoning behind this whole social brands opportunity is that I have this real concern that as marketers we're missing a huge opportunity. We've kind of taken to social media and jumped on that second word. We're all about the media. It feels a little bit unfortunate that we've opted for the buying friends and interrupting people model instead of the making friends and influencing people aspect that social media, if used in its most natural form, actually allows us to do. So it's this that I want to tackle. It's this idea that social media is much more about the social than it is about the media, but how that relates to everything else that the brand does. Not just in advertising, but in packaging and all the other aspects of our day-to-day lives as well. So, 5 provocations, ideally to help you, whether you're a brand, whether you're an agency that helps clients, brands, or even if you're a publisher, understanding where your publications and properties sit within that mix of creating conversations that have value. A format for action, hopefully, the 3 2s. The stuff that we see today, so it's always based on a trend that already exists. There's the tomorrow aspect, which is where we see that trend evolving in the very near future. And then there's the to-do aspect, so what can you as individuals do to take advantage of those opportunities and actually turn them into ROI, basically the money aspect of things. Obviously the hashtag that you've been following this morning. If you have any questions, provocations, or especially if you want to call bullshit on any of this, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please do share them by Eskimo as well. I will endeavour to get back to every single comment at some point after the presentation. Okay, so diving straight into those provocations then. The first one, whenever I speak to new clients about social media, they always say to me, I'm sceptical, I don't see the ROI in this, I don't see how it's going to add value. And it's a great place to start because we're already starting from the right place. If it's not going to add value, we shouldn't be doing it. But let's understand what that value actually is going to to be. If you think about your own personal lives, the brands that you heard about most recently, and by brands I mean everything in the context of anything, so whether it's a TV show, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a shampoo, almost all of those things at some point will have involved an element of word of mouth. It is still the most trusted and the most widespread way that we discover new brands. This is not news to you guys. But I think what's really interesting is that it's not just about discovery. Word of mouth is something that happens day to day. Let's stop being marketers for a moment and just think about life. We have conversations about brands all the time as individuals. And they've all got value, but they're not just about discovery. Especially if you think about things like content. We like to talk about Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, whatever it may be. They are things that we connect with around the water cooler. And a lot of those conversations are about deepening relationships, both with the people that we're talking to, but also with those brand properties. So if you think about it, word of mouth is not just about discovery. I know that's where marketers like to focus their attention, but realistically, the real value of word of mouth is about strengthening conviction, which in turn then translates into actual purchase conversion. So if you take that from a sort of a fairly rational, I'm a brand planner by training, if you take that from a very logical perspective, the brands that people talk about most favourably realistically are the ones that are generating the strongest equity. Equity from the consumer's perspective, not necessarily just from the bottom line in our spreadsheets. If we follow that logic even further, I'm a big fan of alliteration and rhyming aphorisms, so apologies if some of the words in here are a little bit strange, but this idea that an increase in good conversation turns into an increase in compensation for our brand, that's where the ROI element comes into it. What we're looking for are opportunities to inspire conversations between people, not just about discovery, but about the depth of relationship that we have with the brands and with what those brands offer. And that will translate into financial value. But I think this is where we keep falling down. We keep thinking that social media conversations are inspired by the posts that our brands put out on Facebook and Twitter and all these other properties. And it's a very confused and back-to-front way of looking at things, because if you think about real-life conversations as though somehow social media and real life are different things, the things that we talk about when we talk about a brand are its entire world. It may be the packaging, that fantastic example that Merle shared with us earlier this morning from Colgate about the packaging and it driving conversation. But it can even be things like recruitment ads. The things that form our perception of brands can come from any aspect of that brand's world. And those will then drive conversations in social media as well. So when we're thinking about social relationships, we've got to get away from this idea that our social strategy is all about what we're going to post on our social media platforms. Because everything we do can inspire those favourable conversations. And therefore, it's exactly that. Whenever you're thinking about how do we drive that increase in conversation, don't just think about it from the social media perspective. What can we do, even very small things, to drive conversation? So one of my favourite examples is Innocent Smoothies, a great local brand here in the UK. If you turn any of their Tetra Pak packaging upside down, there's a little message on the bottom that says, "Help, I'm upside down, turn me over." It's a very small thing, but it makes me smile every time I see it. And it's the sort of thing that I will show other people. It drives conversation through something very, very simple, to the extent that I'll take a picture of it and upload it onto Twitter. I'm sharing their story, not because of what they posted on social media, but because of something that they've inspired me with that I want to share with others as well. And that's basic psychological stuff. That's just how we work as human beings. But this is where we've got to be careful. I think there's a very real danger again here that we get, we're really good at this. We get very focused on the means to an end and we forget why we're doing something in the first place. Our job is not to create content. Our job as marketers is to create contentment. The content has to be there to drive an outcome, not just an output. And I think that there's a real danger that we've all become content marketers and we're obsessing about the content we create. But especially in a social setting where we're competing with people's best friends, families, other enormous brands in completely different categories, this is where we end up a problem. If you're creating content and you're a content marketer, you are up against Game of Thrones and Orange is the New Black and all these other great content providers. So move away from that idea that content is the magic. Content is not the real thing you're looking for, it's the contentment. And sometimes that can be very straightforward content. It doesn't have to be big, glitzy stuff to have an impact. I'm going to steal somebody else's words, the amazing Cory Doctorow. I'm not a big fan of reading out long slides, so I'll let you have a quick read of that while I sneak it in. It's great. It's a few years old, but it still really resonates with me. I think the idea that obviously content is really important. I'm a big fan of big epic content, but at the same time I love it because it allows me to connect with people that I care about and have conversations with them, sometimes to use as case studies and presentations, but on a social basis, content is a great thing to talk about. If you think back to when you were a teenager, you wore the t-shirt of the band that you loved. It wasn't necessarily because you loved the t-shirt itself, it's because you wanted to find other people to connect with that shared the same interests and passions. And a lot of the time that's what branded content needs to do. It's a means of connecting people with the things that you care about. So, the to-do element of this, it's a fairly logical, straightforward continuation of that. What we're looking to do is inspire the conversations that fuel conversion and build brand equity. Not building content for content's sake, but looking to inspire those ongoing conversations that will allow the people you've already convinced to convince their networks as well. I know that this seems incredibly simple stuff, and yet the irony is that if you look at most brands' Facebook activity, they're desperately trying to outdo Game of Thrones and stuff like that. Inevitably, though, the question then becomes, great, so how do we do that? Fortunately, the answer is quite simple. But it's all about understanding this concept of mutual value. We're still focusing very much on value for us as marketers and as brands, instead of thinking about what's the value to the audience and how do we find that beautiful sweet spot. If you imagine a very simple Venn diagram, two bowls, what we want and what audiences want. Marketing's job is to find the intersection between them. Boiling acrylic copper down into one tiny diagram. But the sad thing is that an awful lot of marketing completely forgets about that. It's the toddler that hasn't learned social skills yet. It's screaming for attention. And the sad fact is that most of our audiences are the business traveller 3 rows behind the screaming toddler on the long haul flight that really, really just doesn't want to hear you screaming. They want you to disappear completely. And I like to use really inappropriate dating analogies when I'm talking about marketing. An awful lot of this is marketing that still comes up to us and says, I really love your eyes, you're really beautiful. And then 30 seconds later, the next ad break comes up and says, I really love your eyes, you're really beautiful. And it repeats this stuff again and again, and it forgets what it's designed to do. We're not going to have an outcome of any valuable nature if we're still focusing on what we want and not what the audience cares about. This is becoming more of a problem. 20, 30 years ago when we could buy prime time slots and people could go and make a cup of tea and go to the toilet, sure, but people would still likely see the ads. Whereas now, this is our reality. This is what we contend with. Is that people can just skip past stuff they don't care about. If we're irrelevant, we're completely ignored. And that means that every single thing we do as marketers has to add value, because if it's not, it is going to be completely ignored. And that is a massive waste of money. State the obvious, but that's where the reverse of the ROI question comes in. If we're not adding value, we are wasting money. So it's just, again, hopefully not news to any of you, but it is that idea. It's moving away from that buying friends and interrupting people. We've got to stop thinking that this is the best way of doing things. If I come up to a group of you talking outside over lunch and I just butt into your conversation and say, let me tell you about my company, you're going to have a fairly low impression of it. Whereas if we can find ways of interacting and sharing things that we care about, that's how relationships form. Basic psychology again, but it's so easy to do this now because we have means of having mass conversations with our audiences through more socially enabled platforms. So again, another rhyming aphorism, but for me, this is the social opportunity that we've been missing. We're not looking to add enough value at every opportunity. We still rely on that sale, getting somebody to a checkout, instead of thinking, as a brand, I have a purpose and a promise that I can share with you, and I can add value at every single interaction. You think about the examples we see most often in case studies, the likes of Red Bull. Nike, all these brands, the reason that especially Red Bull comes through so strongly is that their promise of extreme stimulation, I'll give you my version of it, deliver that through everything they do. The videos you see on YouTube, the stuff that you see even in print, they're there to stimulate your mind. So the product does, sure, but they're delivering that value through every single thing they do. And that's worthy of conversation. That's why they are such a popular and social brand on things like YouTube. There is, of course, a catch to this. I said it was a simple as, but it's not necessarily easy. We've got to change the way that we do things as an industry and as marketers. And the most important of these changes is stopping using models we created in a completely different paradigm. We've got to move away from this idea of a singular big idea and move to a conversation that evolves over time. Because people are going to move on quickly. The funny thing about advertising is that once people have understood it, everything you spend after that is wasted money. It's like repeating the answer. It's like the audience was saying, I get it, I understand, please move on. Our business model as an industry is still stuck about 40 years ago. It's very strange. We haven't evolved in line with the way the audiences behave. If you think about your own life, seeing lots of you lifting up mobile devices and stuff now, we're all addicted to it. I'm up here on stage, I have no intention of using this, and yet I can actually live without it. It has to be with me. It's like a security blanket for grown-ups. Apparently 1 in 3 Americans would prefer to give up sex than give up their smartphone. Makes me slightly worried that either they've got better phones than me, or something I'm doing wrong. It was all driven by media cost efficiency. You think about what we did is we went from the minute-long ad, and then we went, 30 seconds would be cheap for 15 seconds. In my part of the world now, in Asia, there's an awful lot of people looking for 5-second ads. There's a massive problem with that, is that we're trying to spend as little as possible to reach as many eyeballs as possible. It's just about, did we hit them? Did we create that hit? So what Dominic was talking about before, we're looking at if we got the numbers up instead of actually having got effectiveness, which is much, much easier in things like social and digital media, because what we can do is we can actually focus on creating these ideal experiences for very specifically targeted audiences at exactly the right time and place. If you think about a mobile device that many of us take to the bathroom with us, much as we could probably never admit to it in public, but you can reach people everywhere with their phone now. I think what's really interesting is that that allows us to change the way we've been doing things. Almost every TV ad out there attempts to boil an entire brand down into a 30-second soundbite, which, if you think about it from a brand owner's perspective, is a little bit terrifying. Tell me the one thing that you stand for and nothing else, and then we try and repeat that again and again. But the good news is that social media allows us to now have a conversation with you. If I came up and I said the same thing to you again and again for 3 months, boiled down into a 30-second soundbite, I'd be a very boring person. That is the brands that we become. Why do that? Well, we have things that we care about that we can talk about continuously in a never-ending way. And this is the biggest shift that we need to get into our heads as marketers. It's not about what we say. What we say actually doesn't matter. And that's with no disrespect to copywriters. Copywriters will translate what we want to say into the best possible encapsulation, but it's what people understand from comms that matters, not what we say. We've been obsessing about taglines, whereas if we do a little song and dance, or even if we do it by sign language, as long as the meaning gets across, it doesn't matter. We've done our job. So I used to work as an interpreter in my very early career. I had a really bad day because I was obsessing about which words to use. This veteran guy took me aside at the end of the day and he said, ultimately, the words that you use don't matter. You're not a translator translating a book. What we're looking to do is to share meaning from one person's head to another so that they understand the same concepts and can find agreement. And that's what we as marketers need to do. We're looking to act as the interpreter between what the brand wants to share and what the audience cares about. So, rather than creating more and more impressions, obsessing about the number of people we've reached, let's focus on creating better impressions about our brands. Evolving stories are the important bits of this. So, not an ad that we're going to run for 3 months and repeat every ad break that we can afford, but an actual conversation that evolves over time. So, 3 ideas for doing this. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are some of the things that we've been using to develop solutions for our clients. Dandelions, remember the dandelion clock that you blew on as a kid and all the seeds floated off in different directions on the wind? It's a really interesting idea if we think about communications in this way. I've stolen this idea from somebody else. Sadly, I can't remember who it was now. It's one of those things I read on the internet and I laughed. But this great idea that if you put out a whole load of different, disparate ideas, some of them may stick, some of them may not. And it follows the dandelions principle. If only 2 of those seeds from the 100 odd that are on any given seed head germinate in the ground, it's done its job. If the other 98 goes to waste, it doesn't matter because the ideas come across. We're not banking everything in a massive $1 million 30-second ad that says just one thing. Tapas is a very similar idea, but it's a slightly different function. We're looking to bring different ideas together at the same time. So if you think about a tapas meal, where there's lots of small dishes that we can arrange in different ways at different times to actually create an entirely different experience. Comms that do that, again, instead of one single ad idea, we're bringing different media experiences together at the same time. Your TV ad combined with something on mobile, combined with something on social media to create a different impression to what you would do with outdoors. Same desire to share meaning, but just done in a slightly different way. But where we start to get really exciting opportunities is this idea of Kaizen came from Japanese manufacturing, continuous improvement stuff. If we're listening out to what people are saying in social media about our brands and about our markets, we can improve the bits that are broken and we can fix them in real time instead of waiting 12 months to get the results back. So I really, as an advertising lover, I love big ad ideas, but we do need to find ways of telling more engaging stories that evolve instead of being stuck on matching luggage for months on end. But the telling of the stories is only the start. I think this is where I personally start to get very passionate about stuff. Dialogue and conversation. We've never had this opportunity before. All the other media we had before was us to them. And we've never had a meaningful way of finding out what the masses thought about us. It's time for another fundamental change. And the 4th of the 5 provocations is we've got to move away from telling people about ourselves to talking with people about what we collectively care about. For those of you who've been following the hashtag, you already have seen 100 or more tweets just about this morning. So very easy to understand. Across social media, billions and billions of bits of information being shared by normal people every single day. And an awful lot of those are about things that we as marketers care about. How much money do we spend on focus groups? Getting ideas from just 8 people? And yet here are literally hundreds of millions of people sharing the things that they care about for free if we take the time and effort to collect them and understand them. This is incredible value because it's genuine insight. What's more, it's spontaneous and organic. You ask somebody a question as a brand, they will give you an answer that's kind of tempered for what they think you expect. Whereas all of this is very, very blunt stuff. We did some research recently about what people hate about advertising, and they say some very scary things. But my favourite example of this is speaking to a client recently. He's like, why would I be on Instagram? It's just full of photos of people's lunch. So exactly, that's why you should be on it. Because one photo of somebody's lunch can change your life. Let me tell you why, because it sounds a little bit preposterous. But you go onto Instagram and you search for the hashtag food. 117 million photos tagged with that. It's quite a few. I just took a random sample. This is not curated in any way. And mysteriously enough, 3 of those have burgers in them. The one at the top left here is where there's McDonald's. You can recognise the arches from a mile away. The top right, it's a restaurant. The bottom right, it's maybe more glitzy restaurant. 3 of exactly the same product, but in completely different ways. If I look at those as a curious kind of person, I can start to understand burgers are almost always in 2s. They're a social thing. So trying to sell a burger to an individual may not be the way of doing things. They seem to always come served in different ways. Are people out together? Are they out with friends? Whereabouts have they gone? How far from their office, if it's a lunch thing, have they gone with this? How much have they spent on it? The difference between the price of the burger at the top left versus the one at the bottom right may be as much as 5 times. People are willing to spend different amounts on different things depending on the context and the value. So just by analysing those 3 individual things alone, suppose I'm Coca-Cola. So only actually in the top left one of McDonald's that Coke appears. The other 2 seem to have water, which is really interesting. Is that what we would expect? And if not, why not? What can we do with that information? If we do that at mass scale, 170 million photos, it starts to get interesting. Not all of you are into food, I get that, we've got lots of different kinds of brands. But again, take that tag, have a guess in your mind, how many photos on Instagram are tagged with love? It's quite a lot. These are all spontaneous things that people want to share and tell the world that they love. It's a very good chance if you spend 5 seconds looking at that, as marketers we're going to start to get ideas of what people care about. If we're doing our jobs properly, we can actually go out and understand things from that. But the danger is that we're really selfish as an industry. We only care about what we want. And we're only listening in social media to what people say about us. And this is broken. It's like turning up to somebody else's birthday party and judging it on whether people are talking about you. This is not our party. We've got to get into the fact that this is an audience's world and we're there to add value to them. We can learn things and it's exciting. So by not listening to what people are saying organically, that's the biggest opportunity we're missing. We're not seeing new ways to add value to people's lives. And just by listening to the stuff that people are sharing already, we can get that value. So I'm going to flip the chart that we had earlier on its head. If we're listening, so this is my terrible drawing of a radar for social media listening in the middle here. If we're listening to that, we can get ideas for everything in our business. Not just how do we get social media posts, curated content, great, we don't have to spend money on it. That's not the opportunity we're looking for. Something as simple as, every time I open this brand of sauce condiment, and then I close the cap, it splashes and stains my clothes, I'm never buying it again. Very simple to fix the cap on that bottle of sauce, and you don't need to change anything else. And you've learned why your sales have gone down. So if you think about Google being the way that we find the answers to the questions we already have, we can use social media listening to find the answers to questions we didn't even know existed, because people never told us anything before. We didn't have a means of having that conversation. We can now understand where the gaps are. And done best, it takes us to John Wilshire's sort of marketing mantra of, instead of marketing being about making people want the things we've already created, it's actually about making and creating things that people really want. Absolutely fantastic piece of thinking from John. And we can do that now because we can understand what people do want. That Steve Jobs thing of people don't know what you want until you give it to them, I still believe that holds true. But if we're listening to what people are saying, we've got a much better chance of understanding what we might want and not wasting our time with stuff that doesn't matter. So, the to-do on this one, use social listening to inform your entire marketing plan for the future, not just to tell you whether your ad campaign succeeded. And then the last one, and I'm going to build on an awful lot of the stuff that Mary was sharing in her presentation earlier this morning. This is the biggest opportunity for us. It's stepping out of social media and thinking about brands as social entities. So society today expects organisations to give back at least as much as they take from us. We cannot exist as the 1%, which unfortunately almost all brands do. The brands that already give back proactively, though, if you take the likes of Tom's Shoes, they're seen as generous and inspiring. And if you think about the traits of very sociable people, the people we want to be friends with, generosity almost always comes out in the top 3 traits that we seek in others when we're making friends. There's no reason brands shouldn't adopt exactly the same philosophy. So instead of it being something that we do once a year, or we stick it on one page of our annual report and hope that we've relieved our corporate conscience, we've got to stop thinking like that. This is an opportunity for us to really engage audiences and society with the things we care about. So build it into the core of your value proposition. That means that we move away from this idea of shareholder value, back towards that idea that Unilever and Cadbury first introduced, where it's about collective good, but ultimately towards the end here, actually building brands that contribute to society. If we take that to its absolute apex, instead of making better things, we've got to think about how we can make things in the world a better place. The absolute end of that, we want to market with people. Democratic marketing, so brands that are built of the people, by the people, and for the people. We've got to stop selling stuff to people and become a part of society where we create mutual value together. Okay, so 5 things for you there. Like I said, they come from, before you all rush for your phones to snap these, I'm going to make it a little bit easier for you. All of these came from this book, Keep your phones up, keep your cameras ready. You can download the entire thing for free right here, right now, using this link. And if you do have any questions for me, Twitter. Thank you very much.
Good.